Try that again.
Yep.
Good morning. You're listening to the Blaine's World webcast, and this is a thing we do every so often with kind of cool people in the area. And I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and we're speaking with a friend of mine, and he is Ralph Grizzle, editor of the Fairview Town Crier. And Ralph, you can wave to all your friends and friends who are watching this. Okay,
Yeah,
so
thanks for saying I'm a cool person, or by inclusion, I am.
for sure. I should mention that this webcast can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you get more information and catch past shows at my website, which is behind me there, blainesworld.net. What I'd like to do is mention to you a little bit about Ralph's background. He's a journalism graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And let's see, they're out of the tournament. Is that correct? I was so disappointed.
Yes.
Okay, bummer. But we still can root for North Carolina State. Ralph Grizzle began his career as a travel writer. He spent more than 3 decades traveling over the world from his home base in Asheville. He also wrote frequently for Our State magazine. He continues to run rivercruiseadvisor.com, a website that gives readers resources to make informed decisions about the river cruises in Europe. So the first question I asked Ralph, in terms as a kid, where did you grow up?
I was born in Danville, North Carolina, and we quickly moved down to Graham and Mebane area because my dad worked for Southern Railway, and we relocated. I grew up in Mebane. That was my formative years, and my dad went into the logging industry. I followed him into that, decided that it wasn't for me, and that's when I began my travels around the world and the subsequent University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
And so when you were at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, did you always know you wanted to be, I guess, first of all, an editor of a local weekly or a local monthly in Fairview, North Carolina? Was that your goal?
That was not on my radar at all.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's not on too many people's radars. So how'd you get from there then? So started as a journalism major. How'd you get into writing about travel?
Yeah, I traveled up until I was 27 after leaving that hard work of logging with my dad.
Right.
So for about 7 years, I was backpacking, bicycling across America, traveling through Asia with a backpack. And when I came home, I thought, I want to be a writer. That was the first thing because I thought I would choose the lowest paying job I could find with a degree.
And the
And
highest degree of job security, or
yeah, that's right. You can always do it at home and not get paid. Um, but then I found a lower paying job, which is journalism. Um, but it came with a lot of good perks. So when I graduated, now keep in mind, I had started 7 years late. So I was 32 when I graduated in 1990. And there was a posting for Pace Communications in Greensboro. And Pace published all of the in-flight magazines for Piedmont
Okay.
Airlines back then. So there was a posting for somebody who was a recent graduate, a little bit older, which I was, and who had traveled quite a bit. So I met all of those criteria. I went in for the interview, took that job, and it was for the American Society of Travel Agents, their trade publication. So I began by writing about how to manage your office, how to sell your clients car rentals, these sorts of things.
Now a
All
lot of this
pretty
stuff
boring topics.
no, not only that, but a lot of stuff you had never actually done. I guess you hadn't been involved in that kind of stuff.
I had never done any of that. If they'd asked me about bikepacking around the world, I could
Right.
have answered that. But soon after that, Blaine, they said, there's this kind of, it's not a new industry, but you're wanting to, make more of inroads into with travel agents, and it's the cruise industry. And we'd like for you to go on a cruise and write about it. And so I went on a cruise and I wrote about it. It was fairly new to travel agents back then, and they liked the coverage, and they said, "Can you do another one?" So that's around 1992 or so. That's how I got involved in the cruise industry, and I've stayed with it ever since. So 32 years later now, I'm still in the cruise industry.
What was your first cruise?
The first one, good question. It was, I just did a bulk of them that first
Right.
year. So I did
Yeah.
Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, Royal Viking Line, which back in the day it was at the pinnacle of luxury. Royal Viking Line had had one of its founders was someone who's well known today, and he runs Viking river cruises, Torsten Hagen, the Norwegian that you see in all the Viking commercials.
So you
So
started
people
originally.
never leave the industry, basically. People who come into that industry, they never leave because
Well,
it's such a fun industry.
well, you're kind of a great example. I mean, to have been in this all these years, and we'll update, you're still involved in the industry. And you said it's kind of a fun industry. Let me ask you in terms of the cruises. So that industry, as any industry, has changed a lot. And talk about the kinds of cruises now. I don't know if you've been on, I assume you've been on some of them with these ships that take 5,000 to 7,000 people. Have you ever been on that kind of cruise?
Yeah, yeah. So I've been on almost every kind of cruise. And in the beginning, I was fascinated by the big ships. I have two kids in Asheville, and I took them. They've been on a lot of cruises with me, and we began on big ships. We Oasis of the Seas, and back then it was the Sun Princess, and all of these big ships. But what I found was I began to like smaller and smaller and smaller ships. So I would say about 15 to 20 years ago, I began to specialize in the small ship segment. Now, that was a wonderful segment because aside from the luxury, which I really don't care that much about, they operated expedition vessels. And that is what I fell in love with. I went to Antarctica 3 times, Greenland, Russia's Far East, Iceland, you name it. We did a lot of expedition. I was lucky to do several of those with my son, who is in Asheville. But then I did enough of those. So I began to specialize in river cruising in about 2006 or so. And I still do that. And I still love that segment.
And I'd say I haven't been on a river cruise at this point in time, but for the benefit of me and for others who haven't been on a river cruise, what exactly is it?
Yeah, they primarily take place in Europe. There are river cruises in North America on the Mississippi and Columbia rivers. There are river cruises on the Nile, and even safari cruises, which are considered river cruises in South Africa and that area, and Mekong river cruises. But the majority of river cruises and the aspiration for most people is to river cruise in Europe. And the reason that I was able to make such a successful website was that it's very confusing for people. There's the Danube, the Rhine, the Rhone,
Right.
the Main, the Seine, there's Bordeaux, there's the Douro. There's so many rivers. And to complicate matters a little bit more, there are also canals. And most of the canals are located in France. And these are on small 22 passenger vessels. And you'll pass through a lot of locks. So it's very slow. At one time, the canals, they had towpaths on both sides because either people pulled the
Right.
barge or an animal pulled the barge. And now, of course, they're motorized. You go through a series of locks. You can get off at each lock and you can walk or ride a bicycle on those towpaths nowadays. It's a beautiful experience.
Also, I imagine with river cruises, for the most part, then I guess they're smaller in size than some of the big cruises, that
Yeah.
typically, what's the size of them?
Yeah, they range from about, let's say 150 up to 200. And the 200 is sort of an oddity because this is river cruises that are at the higher end. They pack more people on because Torsten Hagen wants to optimize revenues.
Sure.
So he'll be missing things on his river cruise, like a gem, for example. Excuse me.
But we're talking
Yeah,
about
sorry.
the cruise. So you're saying, which I think is one of the beautiful things about such a cruise, to have it, can you imagine 200 people max, as opposed to, I just can't fathom it, 7,000. What's the largest cruises now?
Yeah.
7,000?
Yeah, they're in that range. That's right. It's 7,000.
Have you ever been on a cruise that size?
Oh yeah, we have. Did I enjoy it? Oh, it's a good vacation, a good getaway, but it's not for me.
Well, the beautiful thing I imagine about a river cruise, Ralph, that you put together also is the thing that I hate, I think a lot of other people hate about the big cruises, is to get on and off the boat, and to wait in
Yeah,
lines and then have to take, we just went on a cruise, and I take one day we went on 3 different boats, on the same thing. We had to get from our boat to another boat, then to go on another
yeah,
boat ride. That's a
yeah.
lot of boats. With a river cruise, you don't have that.
No. So the beauty with barges and rivers, with the barge, the gangway is about 6 feet. You could almost skip over the gangway and go ashore. And you're always docked in these beautiful little French villages that otherwise wouldn't get to. On the river cruise, it's the same kind of story. There's a short gangway. You walk off, you walk into these beautiful little villages, or you do, all of them include excursions. So you'll have one in the morning, one in the afternoon. But also while you're docked, you can just get off and walk into town, or you can take one of the bikes. Most of them have bikes on board, and you can go through for a bike ride.
How cool is that? Do they have bikes, or can you bring your own bike, or most of them
They
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 have?
do they have bikes. They have bikes. Yeah,
Okay, very cool. So it's a whole different experience. But as you said,
completely.
you have to give up some of the things, but some of the things, so you don't get to eat, I take it in 5 different restaurants on a cruise. It just, oh, you actually have two though, do you?
You have two on a lot of them.
Yeah.
I just saw balloons go up. I don't know why that one.
Congratulations. But
Oh, okay.
anyway, so two, so I didn't realize you'd have a choice of two, which is not bad at all. And the
Yeah,
same
not on
thing,
all, but most of them you do. Yeah.
the same thing too, because again, I'm not familiar with it. You also have some activities on a cruise. You don't have as many as a big cruise line, but you have some activities going on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't want to single out one cruise line, but I'm going to do it anyway, because they're kind of representative of what happens on these river cruise ships. Alma Waterways, for example, they'll have a pool, they'll have a swim up bar on the top deck. They've got a walking deck up there. They've got a fitness room. They have all sorts of educational lectures. They might have somebody come in and talk about the European Union or World War II or whatever, or how these rivers were, the canals were built, that sort of thing. They'll have entertainment. They'll have a violinist come on, or a small vocal group come on. So there's always something happening on the river cruises. But the best thing to do, Blaine, is just to stand up on that top deck and watch as you pass through Europe. Or if you're lucky, to stand out on your balcony and watch Europe pass that way.
I imagine one other thing too, Ralph, that I don't know if you tell people this, but something that you could do, and I had friends who used to do this too, is to offer your services if you are a professor or not only a professor, just have an interest in some field, be it
Yeah,
European history or you name it. But I imagine a lot of the cruises do bring people on board who give lectures and presentations.
particularly when you get into the ocean cruise industry, not so
Right,
much on the river cruise
right.
because they're limited for space. But I have
Gotcha.
friends who actually an airline pilot, for example, a guy named Ben Rich, and he always emphasizes that BEN and not BEEN, Rich. Uh, but he's a lecturer on a ship, and he did it just like you said. He had a specialty. People wanted to hear him talk, and he he's cruising all the time now with his wife.
Okay, great way to, get to cruise and maybe get them to pay for you or something, but it
Yeah,
can be done. If folks want
yeah,
to find more about river cruises in particular, because that's what you were mentioning you
yeah,
specialize in, you mentioned you have a website. Ralph, what's that website?
yeah. So that's River Cruise Advisor, and advisors with an O at the end, so it's OR.com. And
That's
it's my daughter and I run that site. So anytime you hit a contact or whatever, you're gonna reach us directly. Not, it's not gonna go to somebody else.
it's funny, it reminds me of my journalism days, and we'll talk about your journalism days as well. And so advisor, I used to spell it ER, and it's almost like the same thing too. I don't know with the
Yeah,
paper, you spell it advisor, and then theater, is the other disagreement, is it theater, ER
yeah,
or RE?
yeah,
But it's however
yeah,
you want it.
yeah,
If they want to find your website and want to find information about cruises, if you would, again, the website is what?
yeah. It's rivercruiseadvisor.com. So it's rivercruiseadvisor.com with the OR
Okay.
.com.
And if they go there, what will they find?
Our goal is to give people information where they can make these informed decisions. And so we'll have pricing charts, for example. Let's compare the prices for 2025 on the Rhone River. Let's look at what each line offers and what their prices are and what is their true price. Because a lot of them,
Right.
they might not include port charges. They might include airfare. So we get to the bottom line. Here's what it's actually going to cost you on a daily basis. Those are very valued. People go to those charts all the time. The other thing that we do, so how do we make money? You know, I mean, it's important that people know this. When I launched this back in 2008, I asked Alma Waterways if they would sponsor. They said yes. And I said, well, will you tell us, will you not tell us what to write? And they said yes. They said, we know we do a good job. We'll sponsor. So once Alma came in, all of the cruise lines started lining up to sponsor the site. On the other side, if people do need help, we will connect them with a travel agent. But we try to help them as much as we can, so that they can book on their own. But if they need a travel agent, we recommend them to a travel agent, and there's some revenue sharing in that as well.
But so you don't actually, you're not the travel agent. You don't handle that part of it.
My daughter is now a travel agent. Yeah,
Okay.
she just decided to do that this year. So
Because I mentioned that, and I won't mention the person's name, but we were lucky because we were looking at cruises, and there's so much information, Ralph. It's overwhelming. We
yes,
finally somehow found one site, and then at that site, the travel agent was there, and it was what a pleasure. It was like one-stop shopping, as opposed to,
yeah,
I'll keep your daughter in mind. In terms, it's kind of nice that get the information there, but also then somebody to handle all the booking, because I don't know for you, but for me certainly, and some people, it's pretty confusing to book, especially that first cruise, or if you haven't done a cruise in a long time. There's a lot of things you got to be
yeah,
aware of, I guess.
yeah. And also the travel agent doesn't cost you more.
Right.
It's the commission is paid by the cruise line, and you typically won't get a better price by going directly to the cruise line. So I think it's always good to work with a travel agent. I see how much work my daughter does in the background for her clients. Like I say, she's fairly new at this, but she's tracking down things for them and all.
And
No
the
extra
beauty
charge to them.
and the beauty of it, what I love about it, Ralph, and so she's available, by the way, at that website. People could, if they,
Yeah, she is.
but
Yeah,
the beauty of it, for us at least, it was like one-stop shopping, as opposed to trying to go so many
yeah,
different pieces to put this together.
right.
And it's a pleasure to be able to go to one site. So to find out more about river cruises, they can go to this website. In your spare time, though, Ralph, what's cool about you is you do a lot more than just this one thing. It seems you do about 17 different things. And one of the, what you laugh, but it's true. And one of the other things you do, and which I admire you for, you also write. And let's talk about your writing background a little bit, because you mentioned you went to college and got that job in that first gig. You were telling me off there, you've written some books as well. Is that correct?
Yes,
How many books have you written?
well, three. And I know it might look like I'm thinking about it. I am, because I contributed significantly to a few others. I wrote one book about Charles Kuralt, and some of the older listeners will remember him. He was the pudgy
Right.
CBS newsman, who did 600 episodes of On the Road, uh, which was really, they were stories of hope and unheralded heroes. So he
Right. I
would find
remember.
people who were like, a guy was building a boat in his backyard because he hated dairy farming and he wanted to sell around the world. So they built a boat using jelly jars as lights and all, that sort of thing. Um, so I was commissioned by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to interview his friends, family, and colleagues.
Did he go there, by
So
the
I
way?
interviewed.
Did,
He did. He
okay.
did. So he was the editor of the Daily Tar Heel, the newspaper there. So they commissioned for 20 interviews, and all 20 of these people said, "Oh, you can't stop here. There's 20 more you got to interview." So I ended up talking to I'll call them normal people, like Jethro Man, the bicycle man from near Charlotte, North Carolina, Belmont, who restored bikes for kids who couldn't afford them. And so Kuralt did a segment on him, all the way up to Walter Cronkite, who did not want Kuralt to do his little happy segment at the end of the CBS Evening News. Cronkite said it has no place on the news. We've got the Vietnam War going on and all this stuff. And then once Cronkite saw the first one, he's like, we have to continue this. Did that
Did
change angles on you?
no, you're
Because
cool. You're fine.
okay,
So did you get to interview Cronkite as well?
I did. I did.
Okay, very
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
But listening to you reminds me of, and I only started watching the last couple of years maybe, but CBS Sunday morning show. And what
Yeah.
I love about it is what I love about Crawled, that you can watch TV, but learn something and have a good time with it,
Yeah.
not been, be bombarded by garbage all the time.
Yeah. Also, Blaine, I think that it's a little bit about what like you're doing too. You're about the positive news. You know, I was talking, I have some guys working on my land today, and I was talking to one of them today, and we were just talking about the friendliness of people in the Fairview area, really. And I said it's funny if you read the news or watched the news, you, you wouldn't think that this is the America we live in because there's so many stories that aren't told, and you're telling them. We try to tell them in the paper as well, and Carrault certainly told them. But I think the world is a better place, for that.
But what's one about what you just said is the fact, and not to give your paper a plug, but the Fairview Town Crier, is that you read it, and for some crazy reason, it's kind of you feel uplifted by it. It's kind of a fun thing to read, and there's no politics per se, there's no arguments, there's no negativity. And you were saying it's just kind of nice to be able to come into that environment, without having to
Yeah.
hear bad stuff all the time. So you were saying Carroll. So when you wrote the book, so he was living at the time, is that correct?
Yeah,
When
yeah. Well, when I interviewed him, I
yeah,
interviewed him in 1994. He passed away on July 4th, which was such an appropriate day,
right.
1997.
So had the book
And
already
I,
come out?
the book had not come out because I was commissioned to do that after he
Gotcha.
died.
Yeah.
So I wrote several. I interviewed him for another story, completely different. It was actually he was the keynote speaker for the American Society of Travel Agents for a big
Oh,
conference they
very
had in
cool.
Lisbon, Portugal.
Right.
So I interviewed him and leading up to that. And then after he died, I wrote quite a lot for Our State. I wrote a few stories for Our State magazine about Carrault. Um, and then I was commissioned to do the oral histories.
So that book was kind of cool. You got commissioned to do it or you asked to do it. You wrote two other books. What were they?
Yeah, one of them was I don't know why I did this book. It was Day Trips from Raleigh, Durham. So,
Okay. Very cool.
that was it was not a fun book to do.
It
But the
wasn't?
next one was
Wait, you
the
said
next one.
it wasn't a fun book to
Well,
do?
it was a lot of chasing down details,
Oh,
like it wasn't just like, oh, let's go to Old Salem or something like that and have some Arabian cookies, it was very detail oriented. The other book was detail oriented, but I had a huge knowledge base and still do on that. That was called it was my handbook. It was the ultimate river cruising handbook,
okay.
and that was in 2018.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking that'll be the fourth book then. We talk about day trips from Fairview, North Carolina. We can
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah.
right in your backyard, and that'll be maybe.
Although fewer people are leaving, I talk to people now who won't go to Asheville even because of the traffic.
Well, true. I mean, that's somehow we found Fairview and we just love it. It's like this. We just really like Fairview. It's a cute little community that does it, that brings everything together. Do you have any ideas for future books? So you've written three, you've assisted on others, you have the newspaper. Any future books you have in mind?
I mean, there are always a few that you think about. Like like to write this book. My dad was a logger, as I mentioned early on, and I wouldn't mind doing a book called The Timber Harvester or something like that. I've got some longer stories that I've written that could probably morph into a book, but um, books to me, the Fairview Town Crier it definitely has a component of being a fulfilling thing to do. Books are a lot of hard work. There's a lot of lonely work. Uh, and for me, the rewards just are as great as they are, say, in working with this small team at the Fairview Town Crier. Also, I think if you look at the April issue, for example, the front page, there are a lot of faces on that
But
front
wait, do
page.
you have, I don't have it, mine's upstairs. Do you have it handy?
I don't have it. I don't have it with me,
Okay,
but
but
people,
Fairview Town Crier, go ahead, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, if you look at that April issue, we've got faces all over that front page. There's the folks who run Barn Door Cidery, and you know, uh, Natasha, who entertained us with her violin and fiddle at a fiddle tasting at Turgois Brewing, and explained to us what the difference between fiddling and playing a violin was. And or the fiddle. She explained the difference between a fiddle and a violin, and the secret is it's how you play it.
And just to get back to our guest today, he is Ralph Grizzle, and he's a man of many talents. But we're talking about, I guess, the latest project you're involved in, Ralph. We're talking, that's the Fairview Town Crier. Had to run up and get my copy. It's a really cool paper. And you were saying a little bit about what's on this first page. And you were telling me
Yeah,
the story. Yeah.
yeah. So we were talking about this small team that I work with, a wonderful team. Clark Aycock and Sage Hopkins. Um, and we decided to try to get more faces into the Fairview Town Crier. It's always been an aspiration. It was an aspirations of Clark's before I came. So I just turned to page 2, the calendar of events, and I went to every event that I could. And I found that there's a lot to do. We don't need day trips from Fairview. We need day trips in Fairview because there's a whole lot to do here. I find this to be a very rich community in terms of its intellectual depth, just personality depth, cultural depth. There's just a lot of interesting people here.
Excuse the noise of the
Yeah.
paper, but Ralph was saying the community calendar, and quite an impressive community calendar, for this little town. How many people live in Fairview? Do you know, ballpark?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, because Fairview, where does Fairview stop? Can we claim everything on this side of the parkway?
Right. Yeah, that's it sort of feels that way. You get off the parkway and come down the highway, and it goes
Yeah.
up to, I guess, the Cane Creek Road, I guess. So it kind of runs through there.
Who knows? Because we were looking to go out to excellent creamery. I think it's called Blue Ridge Creamery, and I
Right.
know it's Victor who's on the front page there. And I looked at the time from the office to get out there, 18 minutes. He's in Fairview, and it's 18 minutes to get there. So it's I've never really looked at a map of what actually makes up Fairview, but what we claim it to be. Okay, so here's my dirty little secret. I'm in Fletcher, but my fire department is Fairview. I
Right.
tell people I'm in Fairview because this is Fairview. This has always been Fairview, but the postal routes, they became overwhelmed, so they had to put me on the Fletcher postal route.
Yeah, but you still have, and you also have property in Fairview, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have property in Fairview with a Fletcher address.
Okay, cool. But yeah, it's just we're not doing this to do a commercial for Fletcher, but almost sound for Fairview, but almost sounds like it is because it's just a great town, lots of stuff to do. And again, back to your paper, I think that's one of the reasons I love the paper because you do, I think, a real fine job of trying to cover as much as you can every month, and talk about that
Yeah.
the process in terms of putting together a paper. And we should mention, I assume this is not a staff of 47 different people running around putting the
It's
paper.
really 4 of us there because Veronica and Billing.
Yeah,
But the people who are involved day to day in trying to keep up with all the moving parts, and you'd be surprised at how many moving parts there are, because you have the calendar of events. You've got the library with their own calendar of events.
right.
You've got classified ads and you've got ads. And, you know, people might say, oh, I'm sorry, I sent this date in and it was wrong. Can we change this to this date? When paper comes out, we always get a few phone calls or emails like, you left out my phone number or it was the wrong date. And, of course, we're so embarrassed by that and try to fix it. But it's really a little bit more than we can manage. We're looking for volunteers who would help us manage that part, particularly the calendar of events. That's one of the more difficult things for us to manage.
Well, Ralph, since you mentioned, let's talk about that process, because especially if there are any journalism majors out there or any business majors out there, what a great opportunity to get an experience. I assume you'd welcome anybody who wants to come on board.
Yeah, yeah, we would. It's largely a volunteer organization, so we need to get that out up front.
Well, let's talk about that in terms of then if somebody wanted to come on board for the paper, to mention, you mentioned specific ads, help with specific needs, help with advertising or help with, some of the other detailed stuff. What would they do? What's the best way to get in touch with you or the paper?
Oh, definitely reach out to me, which is always in the paper. My email is always in the paper, or it's just Ralph at fairviewtowncrier.com.
Okay.
And Blaine, we also have yesterday, for example, we met at Reimagine Studios. There were 12 of us there, I think. We labeled the paper. So we half of the papers go to the post office and they stop there and then they're put on the little trucks and distributed around. The other half, we have to put labels on those, and they go on different routes in Fairview, Girton, Fletcher, and Asheville. So I think we're probably labeling close to 5,000 papers, and we got a wonderful staff of volunteers. We have a great time doing it. And there are all kinds of things that people could help with and probably get a lot of satisfaction from as well.
And talk about one other thing that people can help with, and again, to your credit and Clark's credit, you do this, but you also welcome input from members of the community. I'll talk about two ways people can get involved. The one, if somebody has a date they want publicized in the paper, an article they think might be a good article, how do they propose this to you, or how does somebody get something in the paper?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is email because, we get so many spam calls, all of us do nowadays. We don't answer the phone quite as much as we used
Right.
to, but always a quick and easy way to get to us and just to say, I've got this event going on, or I think I want to do an article about this, or there's this person, and these are the stories I love. There's this person that's been a really good person for the community, and I think you should write about them. That's the people I call the unheralded heroes. That's the people who I believe they unite the community. They keep the spirit of Fairview alive. And I think that's the people I like to report on.
And in terms of writing writing the articles, I guess there are two ways they could do this. That they could, I guess, take a stab at it, write it themselves if they want,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
you take community input like that. If people write,
Yes.
and also, not to give you more work, but if they don't write it or don't have the ability to write it, they can go to you or other members of your staff to help with the writing or write the article.
Yeah, that's more when somebody comes to us and says, "I think you should do a story about this,"
Right.
and then we will either assign a writer. We might write it. We might say, "Hey, why don't you have a go at it?" And we'll help you out if we can,
How
or we
many,
will help you out definitely.
typically, how many articles do you have in a paper? Any one issue?
Oh gosh, there's like I said, there are so many moving parts to the paper. I mean, we're 32 pages. There's some full page ads and some with classifieds, but we'll have, uh, gosh, I mean, each page could have one or two stories on it. So it's a couple dozen, I would think.
Are you always 32 pages?
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
Which is really cool because again, I won't mention any other local papers that went shrunk from, four sections to, like 12 pages,
yeah,
and it's, that's so cool that you can maintain 32 pages every
yeah.
month.
There are months when we would like to do 12 pages. But honestly, the advertising revenue, well, let's just say the advertisers, they really believe in the paper, and we've had quite a lot of new advertisers lately. The other thing that was very gratifying is that we had a whole lot of donations as well. People would bring in checks for amounts that surprised me because we're just a little small town paper, and but people wanted to express their gratitude.
And by the way, we should mention that as one final thing that the community can get involved in, but you're a nonprofit, and I know every year I try to make a donation as well. If people want to help out that way, how do they do that?
Yeah, really the same. I would say start the same way. We are working on the website. We never want the website to cannibalize the paper.
Right,
So
sure.
we want to keep this a print publication for as long as we can. But, you know, um, They can go to the website, fairviewtowncrier.com. Our focus is on the paper. So I would say maybe get in touch with me would be the best way to figure out how you want to contribute and volunteer.
And they're in luck, Ralph, because if they go to that website, they can also mention the fact that, or they can also see that I also write a column for the Fairview Town Crier, a humor column, and we're always looking for submissions or ideas from the members of the community. So again, I guess
Yeah.
bottom line and to conclude on that point, but that's what seems to drive, I guess, the paper, that you want it to be a real community paper. And it's like, I'd say 95% of the emphasis is on stuff happening in Fairview.
Well, a lot of the emphasis is, but the emphasis I would say is that we want to unite the community,
Okay,
and whether that means through telling the story about our writing, which Ali did a great job doing this, the feature on Deb, who works at the post office. And we learned that Deb had always wanted to work at the post office. When she was a child, she didn't want to be what other children her age wanted to be. She wanted to work for the post office. And so, just letting people know who their neighbors are, that there's more depth to these people than you might see on the surface, and really uniting this community as much as we can. I think that's one of our focuses. So I don't know what our primary focus is. Our primary focus is to be a really great community newspaper.
and back to what you were saying about Deb, and like you said, almost everybody has a story if you look for it, and that's a great example.
Yes.
And today we even heard the story of this would-be logger or former logger who became this, many different careers. And I have no idea what's next for you, Ralph, but I certainly hope you stay at the Fairview Town Crier for another 10 or 20 years, because it's who counts, right? But anyway, Ralph Grizzle, thanks for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World webcast. One last time, if people want to get in touch with you, I guess we should mention two ways. If they want to get in touch with you, find out about the river cruise industry, get information on that. That website again was what, please?
Yeah, that's rivercruiseadvisor.com.
Okay, and you'll find all you want to know about the river cruise industry and then some. You can also find out, if you want to find out about the Fairview Town Crier, best bet is the website was what?
Yeah, well, it's fairviewtowncrier.com. So just remember that, and then email me at ralph@fairviewtowncrier.com.
Okay, thank you for being my guest. Real pleasure speaking with you. And I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tessetti, and hopefully bump into you sometime in the not too distant future, Ralph. Thanks, man.